let's chat about overbore hunting cartridges. More specifically, is it worth it? Is it something you should consider? My goal with this video today is to give you guys enough information and to start a discussion where you can kind of make the call, is an overbore cartridge for you? And we're going to look at some of the positives and the negatives. I'm also going to throw some terminology out that may be sort of new to you as a shooter. And with the technical knowledge that I'm going to share in this video, you should be able to put some numbers on your rifle. We're going to be using sort of a 6.5 Creedmoor as our baseline rifle, the sort of normal rifle. To back off a little bit, overbore is basically having a small-ish but heavy bullet for calibers with a gigantic amount of powder behind it. So basically that would be like a 22 Creedmoor. Now here I've got an 80 grain ELDM bullet in my hand. Now think about your standard 6.5 Creedmoor shooting 140 grain bullet. Out of that big case, you neck that case down to 6mm, you neck it down once again to 224, or basically 223 for the guys that are used to sort of 223 Remington, 5.56, 22-250. That's the diameter. So you've got the same amount of powder that you would usually have behind a 6.5mm bullet, all of a sudden behind a 223 bullet. So it's gonna freaking whip out that barrel like a laser. Now there's some advantages and disadvantages to having a rifle that shoots so fast. I almost said flat, but we're gonna just right off the bat eliminate. That's sort of a term people use, you know, I've got a flat shooting rifle. Okay, so yes and no. There's no such thing as a flat shooting rifle. It is flatterer, okay? I know that's not a word, but it's flatter than something else, okay? Let's say, for example, a 22 Creedmoor is a flatter shooting rifle than a 6.5 Creedmoor, but neither one of the two is shooting flat with like no bullet drop. As soon as the bullet exits the muzzle of your rifle, it's starting to fall. Fun fact, if I'm here about, I don't know, what, a meter off the ground, if I drop this bullet here, okay, the time it takes from my fingers to hit the ground is the exact same time. Let's, for example, say I had my barrel here and I shot at 100% level with the ground. Where it's going to fall 600 meters down range, it's going to take the exact same amount of time to hit the ground here as if it would just cover the distance and do the vertical drop. So there's no way to get around gravity. Obviously, what we do as shooters is aim our muzzles a tiny bit up to sort of offset that with our trajectory. Now, our number one goal with hunting, and this is probably the number one reason people tend to get overbore rifles, they want to put the maximum amount of energy on target. Okay, so that's the goal with hunting, to dump energy into the target. Now, the target being a deer in this case, or a buck, or whatever you're after. With target shooting, that's really irrelevant. I mean, if you're hitting the target with, you know, 300 foot-pounds of energy, that's not a hope that, you know, you're hitting the target. But you don't want to hit a deer with that. So there's sort of a rule of thumb in hunting that you need at least 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. Now, if you use a ballistic app like Strolock, you can actually scroll in the sort of data sheet. If you turn on that metric, and then you'll see where that 1,000-pound mark is for you. In most rifles, it's still pretty far out, further than I'd like to be hunting in the first place. Now, a couple of more negatives with sort of an overbore rifle. Number one is barrel life. Now, for me, I've never really been concerned about that when it comes to a hunting rifle. Let's say, for example, let's take my 22 Creedmoor that I'm building. I'm going to use that rifle purely for shooting springbok in a very difficult area to hunt in South Africa called the Karoo. So the Karoos generally consist of bushes about this high off the ground. I'm sitting on like a bar stool, but like, I don't know, sort of chest height off the ground, and you'll see the animals running around there and their little heads sticking out everywhere. Now, what makes this really difficult, it's exceptionally difficult to get an accurate range on them, okay? Because you don't know if you're ranging a bush or you're ranging the animal, and it's really, really difficult. So kind of how we hunt there, we try and range landmarks and sort of mark them off and go, okay, it's 300 to there, that bush is at 250, yada, yada. That's kind of how you have to set it up, because there we're sort of waiting for the animals to come in our direction. Now, generally on these hunts, I shoot a lot of springbok. Okay, now if you watch the sort of springbok hunting videos in the past, you'll see we're pretty trigger happy, because there we're either managing numbers or we're putting meat in the fridge. Now, if I had my 22 Creedmoor and my expected barrel life is 1,000 rounds, okay, not a lot. That is a lifetime worth of springbok hunting, assuming I just use that rifle for that application. So if you've ever considered like a 28 Nosler or something like that, or a 22 Creed, and the barrel life has been a concern, if you're planning on doing varmint shooting or sort of hunting specifically, and you're not going to shoot matches and stuff with it, the 1,000 round barrel life thing is really not a deal breaker for me, because I personally feel like you're going to shoot a lot of animals before you need to replace that barrel. And even when you do, it's not the end of the world to go through that whole process, and it's not that expensive. So really the advantages there that I think you get from sort of an overbore caliber is definitely worth it with regards to the barrel life equation. The other negative you generally get, especially if you sort of step into the Magnum size overbore stuff like my 28 Sherman Magnum or even a 28 nozzle, if it's a sort of mountain rifle and it's a super light rifle and you're shooting a heavy full caliber bullet, beyond the speeds that you kind of do with conventional cartridges, you're going to deal with a little bit more recoil, so that's something to keep in mind too. So that could definitely be seen as a negative if you're not shooting from a comfortable shooting position or something like that. Generally, again, for hunting, you're shooting 1 round, maybe 2, dealing with a little bit of recoil for 2 rounds, you can obviously handle it. The thing where people don't want too much recoil is if you're shooting like a precision rifle match, you don't want to be dealing with Magnum caliber recoil for, 200 rounds over the weekend. That's gonna suck. Where a flat shooting cartridge really shines is with something like point blank range. So that basically means is, let's say for example, I take my kill zone on, I don't know, a springbok. Let's say I'm going for that sort of long hard shot on a springbok and I've got about 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters. So for the American guys, and in fact we'll stick to that because it's sort of easier to run the numbers because we're going to deal with bullet drop in inches. So let's say I've got a 6" by 6" sort of target, okay? On that 22 Creedmoor, if I was to zero that rifle at 290 yards, I would be good to go, basically. So at 290 yards, I'm hitting in the center of that 6" kill box. Anything up until 340 yards after that, I'll still be in my kill box. And anything from 35 yards and beyond that, I'm in that kill box. So that gives me quite a large sort of area to cover if I were to zero my rifle out that far. To explain the term a little bit better, point blank range, let's for example say I had a 6" pipe and my bullet started in the center of that pipe, okay? From 35 yards on, my bullet would sort of enter the pipe, figurative pipe obviously, and during that whole flight path, like up to 340 yards, my bullet would never exit the center of that pipe. So basically in that whole range, I'm sort of covered with 3 inches to the top and 3 inches to the bottom. So that's basically point blank range. And the faster the caliber is, the sort of larger that distance is going to be. Now you can manipulate that distance a little bit, and there's a really nice calculator that I'm going to link below the video for you guys if you want to sort of plug in those numbers and see what your rifle's point blank range is. It's a really interesting exercise to do. Now the next term we get to is danger space, and this is really what sold me on the 22 Creedmoor, okay? And I'll give you guys some 6.5 Creedmoor numbers here too. So let's assume I'm shooting an 80 grain projectile at 3,400 feet per second, which is kind of cruising for the 22 Creedmoor. If I had a springbok, okay, now remember in the area, in the region we hunt them, it is really, really difficult to range them. In fact, I would go so far as to say is if they're in the bushes or sort of the brush and the stuff, it's almost impossible to get an accurate range on them. So if I, for example, said, I think that animal is at 250 meters, the quicker your bullet is, okay, the sort of more room for error you have in that range estimation you've made. Now where the 22 Creed is going to shine, if that animal is closer, it can be up to 212 yards, okay, so 38 yards closer than I thought it was, or it could be 284 yards, so it can actually be a little bit beyond 250. And within that zone, I'm going to stay in sort of that 6" kill box. Now something that's important with the dead space, the larger your target is, the larger sort of that distance become obviously. But the further your target away is, the smaller that margin for error becomes. So in contrast, if we were to shoot a 6.5 Creedmoor, our dead space would be, assuming our animal is still at our predicted 250 yards, the close distance would be 224 yards, and our far distance would be 271 yards. So basically on our 22 Creedmoor, we had a combined margin of error of 72 yards. And on our 6.5 Creed, we basically only had 47 yards. So immediately you can see that something that is quick will sort of buy you more room for error there. Now, if you wanted to run this calculation yourself, what you got to do is go in an app like Strolock, and I'll show you guys how to do that here. And basically turn on your drop in inches. Now find a distance, okay, where you perceive your animal to be, or where your sort of hypothetically your animal is. And then turn on the drop in inches and actually go down to the bullet drop chart. Now what I did, I had to set the sort of increments that it jumps really small because, things happen relatively quickly once a bullet starts slowing down. And that's why you'll see sort of the distance before tends to be, and will always be, greater than the distance behind, because the bullet will start falling quicker as it falls, as it loses speed. The distance in relation to bullet drop is going to become shorter and shorter as the bullet slows down. That's relatively obvious. And the second part of this equation is obviously to have your target size. So if you were, example, wanting to shoot a headshot, or more specifically, let's call it a brain shot, which doesn't help you shoot the animal in the head, you got to shoot in the brain, which is generally a much smaller target than the actual head of the animal. So you put in your size of your target. Obviously you want to split the difference. So if it's a 6-inch target, you've got 3 inches to each way, and then you can sort of see in the app how that works and what sort of your numbers are that you can assign to your rifle. Now that's specific to that distance, and again, sort of my decision to circle back to why I decided to get the 22 Creedmoor. I think it's going to be a phenomenal little rifle, and I'm really looking forward to going hunting with it in the future. So it's pretty obvious that I like overbore cartridges. I've got the 22 Creed on the way, considered pretty overbore. I've got the 6.5 Sherman Short, which is definitely overbore. Then I own 2 28 Sherman mags, one of which is a hunting rifle and the other one's a competition rifle. So obviously on the competition rifle, I'm going to sort of pay the price for barrel life on that guy, because I'm going to shoot it way more than I'd shoot a hunting rifle in that configuration. I think the benefits outweigh the negatives when it comes to overbore cartridges, especially in sort of that hunting sense, and that's why I've decided to go that route. So I always want to stack the odds in my favor when it comes to hunting. I want to put animals on the ground as quickly as possible. I don't want to fly all the way around the world to go hunt something, and then for whatever reason, it's a semi-bad shot. And that's the other thing which we didn't mention. The fast, heavy bullet hitting an animal, if you have a semi-bad shot, it's gonna buy you margin for error there. Now that's really difficult to quantify, but I've seen animals soak up lead with perfectly placed shots, and they just go. Okay, so keep that in mind, like a bit of you can't overkill something, let's put it that way. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think sort of this camera angle. It's moving a little bit if you can see. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. Did I miss an element sort of this discussion? And if you've got something really cool like a Lazzaroni Warbird or something like that, which is a ridiculous cartridge. If you haven't read up on that, highly recommended. Probably the most overboard thing there is. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments if there's something more overboard than that. But I hope you enjoyed the video. It's a fun little thought experiment, and hopefully you can assign some of these numbers that we've spoken about to your rifle to help you make better shots when you're out there. If you're going hunting, please be safe. I know it's hunting season for our friends around the world at the moment. We've sort of just come out of ours. I'm having like massive withdrawals. It's literally all I wanted to do lately when it comes to shooting is hunting. It's consuming me. I think it's like a bug that bites us. Anyway, guys, have a beautiful day. God bless you all. Be safe and be kind to one another. And I will see you in the next video. Enjoy the outtakes from this one. There's a lot. Bye. A faster. So it's pretty obvious that I smoke. Our Afrikaans word of the day. If you really like something, you say, I smoke it. And if you really, really like something, you say, I smoke it, stick it, eh? But that's only if you're from up country. Anyway. Do you know the amount of nonsense I talk when I make these videos? It is unfathomable. Anyway, bye.